Giglet, ladies and gents, Pitt the Swordmaster here, alongside co-host Loka for another video on our thoughts on a recent Death Battle episode. Although this time, not in a retrospective form. I figured, that probably wouldn't work for a 12-episode season, so we're just doing it one at a time this time, starting with the most recent episode at time of recording this, Kratos versus Asura.
You know,
and
my most favorite.
Yeah, the response to this episode is certainly interesting. And I think this video especially is going to be interesting because, unlike the last few episodes where I feel like we had, similar enough-ish views on the matchup, I'm interested to see how this goes because we couldn't have more polar opposite views on it if we tried, I don't think.
Yeah, and from what we've talked about, I think our opinions on the episode 2 might be a little more different.
Yeah, although I do know that we at least have a similar-ish maybe ranking on it, but we'll get to that in due time.
Yeah.
I guess just on that note, just like last time, I do want to talk a little bit on the wait period and the matchup itself, because this was the longest wait period we've had for a matchup that we've at least known about in possibly years, unless you want to count, I don't know, Bill versus Discord and Colex or something like that.
See, this is interesting. I actually wanted to talk about the matchup itself in correlation to Death Battle, because this is one of the biggest matchups Death Battle has done in a long time. Not just for the matchup, but also because they have wanted Asura on this show for years.
Yeah, and
we know that he was supposed to be in Season 6 at the very earliest.
Yeah, and this matchup in particular, it's the only matchup to appear both on the Champions Ballot and the Tournament of Champions, and it basically got second place on both of them because, as we saw, it only just barely lost out to Tom vs. Wily in the tournament, and if I remember right, people on the crew have outright said that, if Colex didn't have such a huge push, then Kratos vs. Asura would have just completely swept the 3D category.
Right. I mean, it makes sense. Kratos appeared on the show in Season 1, so he's, definitely one of the most requested returners.
Yeah, especially because, the Norse games hadn't even happened at that point, and Norse games absolutely changed people's views on Kratos as a character since then.
And I feel like it's very fair to say that originally the plan was just to do Broly versus Asura, but then Hulk versus Broly happened. And then people realized, hey, Asura and Kratos kind of similar, and boy, it exploded in popularity.
Yeah, probably because, you really don't need, much, convincing on the matchup thematically, because it's just kind of very obvious if you have the most basic understanding of Asura's Wrath as a game, and everyone knows what Kratos' deal is.
Yeah, it also helps because of the online popularity that Asura's gotten recently.
Yeah, videos for boss fights in Asura's Wrath, Wizen in particular has one that's 10 million views, which, bear in mind, for a game that didn't even sell 200,000 units, that's kind of insane.
Yeah, it is. Quite honestly, ridiculous.
Yeah, I have played Asura's Wrath, but I can definitely tell you, it's one of those games where you're really not missing much by just watching it on YouTube, because it basically is 70% movie.
I can confirm, I've only watched it on YouTube.
Yeah, otherwise it's just kind of mostly a linear beat-em-up, and, the QTEs absolutely add to the game, but it's not something I think is, a selling point by itself, so by all means, if you want to experience Asura's Wrath, watch it on YouTube. The story is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, you can't really say the same for God of War. It's very much gameplay, especially the older ones.
Oh, absolutely. The Greek games are definitely ones that you just kind of have to play for yourself. The Norse ones, you can get away with watching them if you just really want to appreciate the story, but as someone who has played, 2018 before the episode's release, I can say the gameplay is very much worth your time as well. And I think that's another thing as well, is that Death Battle themselves kind of leaned into the sheer hype surrounding the matchup, not just with the poll, but also just all the announcements and little, driplets that they were giving us on the episode, because they gave us a short sneak peek around when the Kickstarter first came out, and we got the announcement not too long before the episode was to drop that Devil Artemis had animated 9 minutes of animation for the episode, which, as an animation student, I can definitely tell you, 9 minutes of animation is kind of bug nuts to do for a show that normally does 3 or 4 at most.
Devil Artemis has also stated that animating Asura in a fight was his passion dream.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of hype going into this one.
You really couldn't escape people just being super excited for the episode up until its release, with the only even vague exception just being like some skepticism when the sneak peek dropped, and some people are like, I don't know about some of these lines, but that was more like a bump than anything.
Yeah. And it also got interesting after when Devil Artemis tweeted out that he had like changed the script a bunch because he didn't like Asura portrayal. Like, it was very exciting to see them like taking this matchup and then the animator having a huge part in his passion project getting made.
Yeah.
Looked like we were getting a big one here.
Yeah, of course, we'll comment a bit more on that in a bit, but I think I want to talk about just like our histories with the matchup as well while we're at it. Namely in the lead up to the episode, because personally I've been very outspoken that I am not a fan of the matchup at all, but it was also one of those cases where, I mean, everyone I knew was super hyped, so I was just like, I'm not going to say anything, I'll leave them to that, which might not have been the best idea, because who would have guessed, bottling up not feeling very hyped for something gets a little soul draining after a while.
And it's interesting. I remember that I used to not like this matchup at all either.
Yeah, I remember that as well.
I don't remember when or even why I changed my mind on it.
I think it was the initial prediction blog, if I remember right.
That's possible. That is very possible. Like, I remember my original issue being, you know, the scale issue and Kratos' weapons, just having too many of them.
Yeah.
But then it's probably like hearing that, oh yeah, he doesn't use them anymore. Like, I wasn't too into God of War back during this time. And then also just, I feel like it was definitely the story potential that got me interested in the matchup, because wow, it could make for a great long series project together.
Yeah, and that's the thing I said in at the start of the reaction video as well, was that I understood the appeal of the matchup more when it was presented to me that, you know, people like it for the story potential over the fight potential, which isn't something that I personally am into, because I like my death battles to be more about the battle and the story to be a nice bonus.
Right.
So that's why me finding the very different scale and fighting styles to be a really big problem, which wasn't really helped by the fact that, I won't delve too much into it, some people can be very elitist about these two in versus, because it is so strange the sheer level of denial some people have over the scale difference. Namely with...
Yeah.
I don't even know if I want to say namely with Asura or Kratos, because I think some people just kind of hyper-fixate, both fans and haters of the matchup, too much on Asura being a planet buster. When being real, even after playing Asura's Wrath, I realized you could take Destructor out of the picture entirely, and the problem at hand would still be the fact that Kratos is usually portrayed like no more absurd than like your Lynx or your Chosen Undeads in terms of scale. If you removed all statements and lore from God of War, frankly, the most absurd thing you get that wouldn't take like 20 minutes for him to accomplish would be maybe tossing the Colossus of Rhodes around. Asura, meanwhile, just straight up screams loud enough to nuke a continent. That kind of thing.
Even as someone who really likes the matchup, I think that's a completely fair criticism to have of it.
Yeah.
But like, just in gameplay alone, Asura zips around and he like flies into space easily. He blows up huge starships with like simple projectiles. Like, the matchup, to get the matchup to work, you need to know Kratos' stats. You need to be a power scaler.
Basically, yeah. And that's entirely the reason, like, why a lot of people that aren't as versus brain rot or you and I would just look at the matchup and ask, how does Asura not just flatten Kratos into a pancake?
Yeah.
And that's why I want to emphasize that, like, if you like the matchup just for, like, the story potential, or just if the problems with the dynamic don't bother you, that's completely fine. Just, as I said before, don't be a dick about it. That's really the bottom line.
Just be tolerant of other people's opinions.
Yeah.
It's not that hard. If you don't agree with them, just you don't need to.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting, like, just keeping that in mind when we go into the fight itself. But before that, there's obviously the analyses, so let's just go over that quickly. Starting with Kratos.
I remember when this sneak peek dropped, like, obviously the analysis preview.
Yeah.
And we were worried. Because it was kind of bad.
That's the thing I find interesting. The difference between the amount of content Kratos has and the amount of content Asura has is night and day. Because you're talking about a whole-ass franchise versus a single game and, like, 2 adaptations of it that next to nobody even knows about.
It felt like they were trying their hardest to get the Greek stuff out of the way.
Basically, yeah. And when I look back on it, I did kind of feel like it probably would have been better to maybe just lightening around the weapons and cover more of the Greek story, because at the end of the day, they weren't going to use, like, any of those weapons in the fight anyways, so if it wasn't that important, you might as well have just used that time more resourcefully, I feel. And I do understand why they save most of the story coverage for the Norse games, because at the end of the day, the Greek games, they have a story, but they're definitely more just about the big-scale boss fights, exploring the world, the hack-and-slash gameplay, that kind of thing. The Norse games are like when they really, really hard laser-focused on it. Obviously, that's not to say the Greek games don't have a story at all. They do, but, you know, there's a reason, like, why people found Kratos infinitely more fleshed out by Norse.
Like, in all fairness, I do really like the start of the analysis going into the lore.
Yeah, they do a really good job.
I really like the writing of them saying that the world was born through violence, because, you know, God of War.
They did a really good job, like, presenting the world building at the start. I definitely agree there.
But that makes it so weird to me that it is. Then it just jumps in instantly into here's all of the story in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
But I think this is just my opinion. I think Greek Kratos is more important to Kratos than Norse Kratos. It is the basis of his character. It is his origin story, and just basically ignoring most of it is such a weird choice, because I get it's a lot, and you have 2 eras of Kratos to focus on in one episode, but I think that you should have just made a longer analysis then.
Fair enough.
His wife and daughter only get like a footnote mention.
Yeah, and it is something that I do say that the Greek games aren't as story heavy, but it's still definitely something that's prevalent throughout the games, that his guilt towards killing his family weighs on him. Like, even in God of War 1, you have a couple of nightmare sequences where he has to protect his wife and daughter from a bunch of oncoming enemies. So yeah, it definitely could have benefited from like more of a mention of that.
That's what's so difficult to use Kratos.
Yeah.
Because most of the Greeks, all of his Greek weapons don't work anymore, if you want to use Norse Kratos.
Yeah, besides at least like the Blades of Chaos and Olympus.
Yeah. But you gotta have it in the analysis, because it's such an iconic part of his arsenal.
Yeah.
But it just makes for a very awkward rundown.
Yeah.
Especially compared to the much more straightforward Asura.
It definitely picks up a lot more around when they get to Norse, I feel.
I agree with that.
Like, in that regard, they do a really good job of, like, faithfully summarizing his character growth, and how... I said before that, like, I played through 2018 before the episode dropped, and I did like how they emphasized his whole journey with Atreus, which I thought, just a side tangent, I love how they never actually call Atreus by name. He's just exclusively referred to as a boy.
I love that, and now the boy is a man, and also a bear. But yeah, I think the Norse part of the analysis is basically flawless.
Yeah, and I do like that they also better tie his weapons into a story in that regard, because, yeah, stuff like the Leviathan axe and all that are very relevant to, like, his character growth, his guilt over what happened in the Greek games, that kind of stuff.
I especially really like the comparison between the axe and the blades that they present, like how the blades are chaotic and uncontrollable, while the Leviathan axe is a much more direct and focused weapon.
And how he, for the longest time, didn't even want to look at the Blades of Chaos again, because they were just a reminder of the past that he had.
Yeah. They also do a really good job of, like, they don't mention the Spartan Rage until, like, the nearing the end of the analysis. I think that's a really good decision, because it drives in what they say in the conclusion, that it took a long time for him to harness and, like, control his rage.
Basically, yeah, which stands in stark contrast to Asura, where they go, like, the whole analysis talking about how he's able to control his rage, but we'll get to that in a bit.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to say is, I didn't recall, like, a ton of outright jokes throughout Kratos' analysis, but I will say I did, like, some cute little in-jokes in, like, the different Arsenal segments, all that. Such as, yeah, like the slide puzzles referencing Sackboy and Shovel Knight. Like, that got a chuckle out of me.
But also, they said before Shovel Knight to stand still, no, he lost. He got whopped. Just, come on.
Yeah.
Come on now. It's Shovel Knight, you don't beat him.
Unless you're Scrooge. Which is funny, considering Shovel Knight was mollymopping Scrooge for most of that fight, but that's an unrelated tangent.
Groot McDuck would beat the shit out of Kratos. We'll make a video on that.
Oh, absolutely.
Anyways. So yeah, Kratos analysis. I would say it's good, but not great.
Yeah.
The back half really saves it.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Asura's analysis, I don't think it's a stretch to say that this one's as perfect as you can really get.
Yeah, like it's hard to mess up an analysis on a guy with only one game.
Yeah.
But yeah, even besides that, I think this one is just really good.
Yeah, like basically everything you need to know about Asura and his entire arc is covered in this. Both like his origin, his arc, and even how like characters like Yasha factor into it and how he would have helped Asura to overcome like the moments his anger went out of control. And as well as like how Mithra factors into all of this and why he basically killed the creator of all of existence because, you know, he made his daughter cry.
I think my favorite part of the analysis is when they introduce Destructor Asura, and they talk about how everyone saw his anger as a weapon, but it was actually like a shield.
Yeah.
This is really, really good writing.
They do emphasize a lot throughout the analysis just how fine a control Asura has over his anger and how he is, the one line that sticks out to me is, Asura is not some one-dimensional anger machine. Keep that line in mind for later, but in the vacuum, in the context of the analysis, it is great that they emphasize that Asura is not just some mindless beast. His anger is entirely for just saving other people in general. Either, whether it be Mithra or even just the humans that the gods were preying on.
Yeah. I think, like, that is what makes Asura such a great character. That even though he's, you know, the super guy who flies through space and punches a lot of things, that he's very human. And the analysis does a great job of touching on that. That he's just a guy who wants to protect his daughter.
And I think as well, even just the presentation of the analysis is great as well. It's very rare that we get, like, music from the actual game, but luckily half of Asura's Wrath's OST is just classical music, so getting to hear that in the analysis, that's a plus.
Yeah, it does a great job of escalating the analysis too when it goes into, you know, the structure and chakra warding, of how ridiculously powerful it is. Like, background music can do a lot when you're talking about things like that.
You can definitely feel like the appreciation to have for Asura's character all throughout. Especially the part where they say he should be in Marvel vs. Capcom.
True.
Please, God,
Go
Capcom.
further. He should be in Street Fighter.
Absolutely, yes. I'll go even further. He should get a remaster.
Why should go further? He should be in Smash.
I agree.
But yeah, Asura, great analysis. Just basically flawless. One of the best ones we've got in a while.
I'd say so, yeah. I think the only one from the independent era so far that I'd say give it a run for its money are kind of obviously Bowser and Eggman.
Yeah, but that's cheating, so...
Yeah. Alright, so outside of the start of Kratos' analysis, mostly good start, I'd say.
Yeah, I think you could say that. It definitely... Only a few minor parts that actively upset me, and I can look past, like, the Greek stuff because of just how they have to structure this.
So... here comes the part where things get weird. Okay, so the fight then.
First of all, the sneak peek we got months and months ago was very interesting.
Yeah.
It got me very hyped.
As it did a lot of people, really.
Yeah. I never got your thoughts on it, but I can imagine what they are.
And I think my thoughts at the time were, I mean, this looks beautiful, but it doesn't show a fight at all, so...
Yeah, that makes sense. And then when the episode came, they cut it out.
Maybe less so they cut it out, but more, it didn't really go anywhere.
Yeah, and if you look at the storyboards, it was never supposed to be in it.
Yeah. That is kind of one of the things I take issue with the setup is, it just does feel like completely random. And speaking of someone that's played both games, I do not remember a moment in these games where Kratos just randomly gets teleported to fuck all else.
Here's the thing, we know what the intents were supposed to be. Kratos was supposed to be on Gaia, and he was supposed to kill a bunch of people on Gaia, and Asura was supposed to be like, oh, that's the god of war, he kills people, oh, he's on my planet, I'm gonna fight him. But then, when you include the independently made sneak peek, you force Kratos to teleport in, and Asura knows he's been there for 2 seconds. How did he find out?
Yeah, you know what it feels like? It kind of just feels like a fucking Smash reveal. Like, that's the kind of setup you get to lead into Kratos being, like, the next playable fighter.
Yeah, And like that just does not work for this.
Yeah, I know the idea people have levied around is Asura hearing about, like, the reputation Kratos has as the destroyer of worlds and being like, not on my Gaia. And that is interesting, but the way they paint it in the actual fight kind of just makes it look like Kratos just beat up a bunch of random enemies in Asura's wrath and was, like, right next to his perfectly unharmed daughter and was like, I throw hands, bitch!
You see, that's the issue. I think the idea behind the setup makes complete sense. And I think it could have been fixed if they just didn't force the sneak peek into it.
Or at least if they, like, maybe even included a line where Asura was at least aware of why Kratos might be a problem, because otherwise it just looks like he's attacking some random Johnny he's never seen before. Like, obviously he does know, because he does refer to him as the God of War, but, like, that could mean anything.
Yeah. It's just a very, very weird setup.
Yeah. I will say as well that Mithra's inclusion in the fight in general, I just always found very strange, because here's the thing. The reason, like, Asura gets as face-meltingly angry in Asura's Wrath as he does, and it even attain, like, most of these super forms, is because of the knowledge that his daughter is kidnapped, she's being hurt, and he needs to save her. So just kind of being there completely unharmed makes me wonder, why is he so angry? Like, obviously Asura was, like, angry beforehand. That's, like, why he has such a reputation in series. But, like, all of the stuff afterwards, that was when he was betrayed, his daughter was kidnapped. So her just being unharmed here just makes me ask, what's the problem, dude?
The issue is that Asura showing up, seeing Kratos having killed a bunch of enemies, remind you, these are enemies from Asura's Wrath. So him having seen Kratos kill enemies and do nothing to his daughter and just want to kill him makes him look like a one-dimensional anger machine.
Yeah.
And that's not good, because you specified that he's not that.
Yeah. I think as well, like, I do like Asura trying to protect his daughter, and in a vacuum, them referencing, like, the "you made my daughter cry" line is great. I don't think it works as well in the context here, because in Asura's Wrath, when he says that, it's after Chakravartin put Mithra through more suffering after what the godly generals already did. Here it's just, she's crying because Asura was hurt. That's it.
Yeah, so technically it's Asura's fault that she's crying.
Yeah, and bear in mind, he goes berserker mode in the game after witnessing, like, a bunch of humans that he couldn't save just die. So, I know it's not the intent, but the implication that he just gets as angry seeing his daughter crying over him as he does witnessing a literal genocide.
Yeah, like, I think it needs to be repeated. She's crying because he got hurt because he picked a fight with Kratos. He made his own daughter cry. Asura made his daughter cry. He would never do that. That would never happen.
Yeah. Let's just get this out of the way right now. I want to skip ahead to, like, something they say in the post-analysis where they expressly give Asura the advantage in experience, both because, like, he's just generally lived longer, and also because he has better control of his anger. I want to emphasize, the fight shows the exact opposite of this. Kratos throughout the entire fight is, like, talking about his own experiences of being consumed by wrath, and telling Asura, "You're letting your wrath consume you? Chill the fuck out, dude. I've been there, I know what it's like." And Asura is just kind of getting pissed at him over every little thing.
Let's just be explicitly honest with this. We don't like Asura's writing in this fight.
No. And that's the thing that's so weird, is how we know everyone on this team wanted Asura on, at the very least likes Asura and wanted him to get more appreciation. So what happened here? And I have a theory of what might have happened here. I looked at the writing team for this episode for doing this, because I know we'd been asking before, how can the analysis paint such a perfect picture of Asura, and then the fight just kind of portrays that? There were 3 writers for this episode, and I have the theory that, like, I wouldn't be surprised if the analyses and the actual fight were just actually written by completely different people. And knowing that Devil Artemis himself stepped in to make changes to the script because he was unsatisfied with all of that, I think that kind of explains, like, a lot of why Asura feels completely antithetical to how they paint him in the analyses.
That's entirely possible.
Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised. Obviously, I think the way Devil Artemis kind of went about it is maybe not the most professional thing in the world, but like we've seen through the storyboards some of the initial ideas they had with Asura, and some of them were not good.
You could say that. Like, I remember everyone collectively agreed that the Death to All Gods line was bad. That's not even the worst part of the storyboard.
Now, at the end of the storyboard, Asura just straight up blasts away half of Gaia, which is maybe one of the most out-of-character things we see in the entire show.
Yeah. Like the Death Battle fandom has this weird obsession with cosmic destruction. I think that if this was in the episode, everyone would hate it.
Yeah, and obviously I don't know what goes on in Death Battle's production, but I've studied animation for 4 years. I know the production pipeline, and I'm willing to bet that that was not the storyboarder's idea. Because the storyboarder is just putting, like, what the writers suggest on paper, essentially.
Yeah. Like, unless we get direct confirmation of anything, it's impossible to know why or who had this idea, or how it came to be, or if people agreed on it, or whatever, you know. But what we can all agree on is that it's just bad and extremely mischaracterized. You cannot go out of your way in the episode to explain how a character acts and then do the exact opposite in the fight.
Basically, yeah. I think that's the weird thing is, I wouldn't call it as, like, explicitly god-awful as, say, Zex or Rock Lee, where it's just, like, the exact opposite of what the characters stand for. I feel like the best way to put it is that Asura feels kind of Flanderized.
Yeah. He feels like a one-dimensional anger machine.
Basically, yeah.
He feels like someone watched just the Asura, the Destructor segments, and was like, yeah, that's Asura.
Basically, yeah. And I think the thing that makes it so weird is how they try to paint this narrative that Asura is like this monster that Kratos feels compelled to stop. This isn't a bad idea in theory, it's just not Asura.
See, it would make sense if, like I said, I think the idea of the setup works. And I think Asura would definitely shut Kratos up if he tried to be like, oh, I understand your anger. And Kratos would obviously see that as, okay, yeah, this guy sucks.
Yeah.
But they went too far.
Basically.
There's a good idea of a narrative in this script.
It's just the execution.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to briefly bring attention to Kratos as well. There's no debating that Kratos was the better handled of the two, I feel.
I think Kratos is handled well out of, like, except for, like, a couple moments.
Yeah.
I think he's done very well.
Pretty much. Like, even if it's a little in the actual context of the fight, like, him talking about his past experiences, I do like that. I think the only two things that I feel were kind of, character-wise, first of all, that fucking smile. Like, I think it's funny, but Kratos is not smug. He would not look at a Titan like that.
I will say, if I disconnect my attachment to these characters, that scene is one of the coolest things I've ever seen on this show. But when I look at this and I see Kratos, Norse Kratos, the guy who hates fighting and just wants to retire and go home, and see him smile towards that attack.
It's just
That's
funny.
Stupid. That's stupid. That's silly.
Yeah. I think the other thing that did kind of bug me about Kratos as well was the end when he just kind of walks away from a grieving Mithra.
Yeah.
I'm conflicted on that because, on the one hand, maybe I could see it if you frame it as he just wants to leave her alone to grieve, but would Kratos really just leave her with the person she just murdered? There's a scene exactly like this in 2018 where Freya nearly dies to Baldur and Kratos kills him, and Freya gets angry at Kratos for killing her son. And Kratos does try to talk her out and be like, we all have sins to bear. If I didn't do that, you would have been dead. He obviously had to justify himself, but he didn't, like, try to run away from the problem. He did, like, try to tell her, I had to do something. Yeah, so, I don't know, him just kind of walking away from someone whose family he just murdered, I don't know about that one.
Yeah, I will say I do prefer that to another Tanjiro versus Jonathan situation where Mithra just goes with the guy who killed her dad, because what the fuck? And of course you can't just put a 2-minute scene of him talking to Mithra after the fight.
Maybe if he at least, like, stuck around to console her or something, it could have worked.
Yeah. But I'm okay with with the way they handle that, because I know it would be weird to make.
Yeah. I think that is kind of an interesting thing to note. They said before release that, like, even after chopping up the animation, they still ended up with, like, 6 minutes worth of a fight. This isn't a criticism, this is just an observation, but the actual fight itself is really still just the normal death battle length. It's just got a much longer setup and ending before and after it.
Yeah. And also, the Destructor part takes up, like, I don't know how long, but for what happens in it, it's very drawn out. Which I understand impact and all that, but, this isn't really a longer fight than we usually get, even though it was very much advertised at it.
Yeah.
I'll say I'm not blaming Devil Artemis for this.
All
he said is that he animated 9 minutes of content, and people went away with that, but, maybe don't say it then.
Yeah. I guess that is a good segue into, like, the fight itself. I will say off the bat, I think the actual, like, visuals themselves look fucking stunning.
Yeah, people said that it was a downgrade from the sneak peek, which I get in some areas, but overall, I think it looks great. There's nothing wrong with the quality of this fight.
I think there are, like, 1 or 2 bits that look a little, like, the Spartan Rage, the aura off it just looks like a red fart cloud, but otherwise...
There's also the unrendered cliff.
Yeah. But otherwise, I think, like, the arena looks absolutely gorgeous. The models mostly look on point. The Destructor reveal, that is such a clean-looking visual. And I also like the little touches, like the title, similar to what appears in Asura's Wrath.
Yeah. Though, I must say this, where are the cuties?
Yeah, we couldn't dance around that. Like, genuinely, the fact that outside of the alternate ending, the only QuickTime event to show up is the burst is... How is that the only one?
I don't understand. It would be so easy to add them. And there's, like, the most obvious spots for them, too. Like, when Kratos leaps across the asteroids, or when he holds up the fist.
Yeah, like, that's the thing, too. If there's one thing people bring up about Kratos vs. Asura besides the story and all that, it's the QuickTime events. It's what you think of...
There's one thing people bring up about Asura in any fight, it's the QuickTime events.
Because, like, you can't avoid it. Even if you're looking at it on YouTube, those QuickTime events are in your face all the time.
And it's worse, because they mention them in Asura's analysis.
Yeah.
Like, come on. I could probably add them to the fight.
Yeah.
It's just a PNG.
Other than that, as far as, like, my criticisms with the actual fight goes, besides the characterization, this is the interesting thing that almost none of it has to do with the animation itself, because, for the most part, it's about as clean and polished as you would expect. 90% of the problems are just with the actual, like, fight direction.
Being that Asura gets molly-whopped the entire time.
Yeah, like, here's the thing. I mentioned how I didn't think the fight worked because their fighting styles were nothing alike and didn't match at all. And I don't think the actual episode really did much to convince me otherwise, because a lot of the fight was just... It's like what people often say, it's like a 1-minute melee where it's them taking turns doing combos on one another. And you can tell that their styles are just so completely contrasting, because you'd have a scene where Asura just performs like a fucking Dragon Ball FighterZ combo on Kratos, and then you'd have Kratos just like beating the shit out of Asura with his weapons, and you can tell that these just are nothing alike, and it kind of feels off-putting in a way. Like, when I see Kratos just getting a fucking shonen combo, it just doesn't look right.
Which is so weird. I like this matchup a lot. But watching this episode made me question if I actually liked the matchup in terms of a fight. Like, it took until actually seeing it on screen for me to be like, okay, and you know what, maybe they had a point.
Yeah, and that was kind of a weird...
To be fair, you can definitely make it work. I believe that if you try hard enough, you can make any dynamic work. But Death Battle doesn't have the time to try everything.
Yeah, that's how I felt. That's sort of similar to how I felt, because when I watched the fight, I felt like it proved, like, a lot of my problems right, but I also didn't want to say, I told you so, because do you really feel satisfied being proven right that a matchup didn't do your favorite character justice?
No, I feel like that's the issue. Like, most of the time when you have a negative view on something and you then watch it, you want to be proven wrong.
Yeah, like, I'm gonna take pride in being proven right that they weren't gonna do Asura right. Like, what's more important, winning a pointless argument or seeing a character I like represented right?
Exactly.
And I think a lot of this culminates into the Destructor segment because I'll give it props for being infinitely better than the storyboards. I still wouldn't say I like the sequence, though. I think, if you look at it in a vacuum, it would make for a raw poster or something. The cinematography, the lighting, all of that is superb, but it's just the Destructor throwing one punch and then getting completely styled on.
Yeah, that's kind of what I said. Like, it looks awesome. Then I remember that this is Kratos.
Yeah.
And this is so high above anything we've seen Kratos do on the screen ever.
Yeah, and it's made doubly worse because this is something that always bothered me. How people will always try to shut down you saying, how is Kratos supposed to work against the Destructor? They'll say, have you played God of War? He's defeated, Titans all the time. And I'm just here do you want Asura to be treated like a God of War boss?
Do you want to watch Kratos climb on Asura for 8 minutes and then stab him?
Not even just that. Or do you want to watch Asura be treated like someone that the entire point is to kill him instead of a fair, equal fight?
And when you watch the Asura Destructor segment in the game, he's flying around, he's moving quickly, and he's throwing attacks. All he does in this fight is punch once and then gets shit stomped.
Yeah, it's obviously a callback to Wizen, but the difference is, Wizen's a bum, and that fight was supposed to be...
only does that. That's all he does.
Yeah, the Wizen fight was all spectacle. That was supposed to be the game's way of showing you, this is the kind of shit you can expect from this game. That was not meant to be an empowering moment for Wizen. If anything, that was meant to show how insane Asura is for being able to fight back against that.
Which makes it such a shame that this is the final thing Asura does in the fight.
Yeah.
He's being compared to a character who only existed to show how cool his opponent is, and then you replicate that in the fight?
Again, this isn't shit talk anyone for matchup, but this is exactly what I mean of how... what part of this is supposed to work for Asura? You can say Kratos fought Kronos, Atlas, all that, as much as you want. Where does Asura come into this?
Yeah. It's just weird. It's just weird. It's not what I wanted. That was my first thoughts after watching this fight. This is not what I wanted.
Yeah. There are still things that I can give praise to, though, besides what I already mentioned, in, the visuals and cinematography. I think the performances are definitely spot on. Chris Guerrero as Asura sounds exactly like him, frankly.
Yeah. The one thing you need to get right with Asura is the yells, and he does a good job at it.
Yeah. Kratos sounds good.
I'm not expecting him to break his throat and throw up blood.
Yeah. Kratos is also good. I will say, he doesn't 100% get the Christopher Judge impression down, but it's close enough. I think the one criticism I have is that Kratos does occasionally kind of sound like he's slurring his lines at times.
I don't have any strong opinions on his performance, except for the death cannot have me get exchange, because he locked in for that.
Oh, absolutely. But you deserve a worthy end! That's perfect.
Yeah, just straight up, those are just cool-ass lines, cool-ass deliveries, well done.
Yeah. And if there's one thing about the episode that I can absolutely praise, I genuinely think this episode has the best track in the show so far.
Ooh.
I know that might be a hot take, but I swear I looked up how to pronounce it beforehand. Rathi, genuinely perfect. I love this track so much. And I think it fits the characters in an unexpected way, but it fits them perfectly because you would assume that a track for this would be something super grand and epic and something that makes you feel like you've got fucking testosterone going through your body, but I think the more melancholic way they go about it, it's different, but considering the whole gist of how both of them have been through so much and just want to be able to protect those they love, I think that little melancholic touch adds to the story-esque feel of it perfectly and still manages to fit the rage-fueled parts amazingly, both with when you get those epic male vocals coming in and also just the range of emotions going through fuels the anger a bit more. I realize I sound really pretentious right now, but I hope you get what I mean.
No, I understand, and I absolutely agree. I mean, it works in the main theme of Asura's Wrath, which is a phenomenal song.
Yeah, In Your Belief, you can hear the references to that in the track, and it's fucking beautiful. I love it.
I mean, if there's anything to say, it's that Death Battle doesn't make bad music, and yeah, this one is fantastic.
Yeah. Beowulf, you knocked it out of the park with this one.
Well done, mate.
Yeah.
And I feel like that kind of encapsulates our feelings, because everything visually and audibly is great.
Yeah.
It's just what's actually beneath that we have an issue with.
Pretty much, yeah. And then I guess that leads us into the post-analysis then.
It's fine.
I think this is another episode where I didn't really feel like the categories were, like, overly necessary. Like, some of them did feel, like, a bit tacked on, like... It's fucking obvious who takes versatility, for instance.
Yeah. They could have combined, like, versatility and experience into, like...
Yeah. Because, like...
I'm not a big fan of the categories either. I've always... like, ever since they got introduced, I've been thinking, like, okay, how would you handle an episode like Horror vs. Storm for this?
Yeah. Let me put it like this. Who do you think is more versatile, the Swiss Army knife of weapons or the flying brick? Yeah, I think the same goes for experience in that regard, because, I mean, you're basically just comparing, like, the number of years they've been around at that stage.
Yeah. And then, I cannot say I'm a fan of the stats they gave either.
Yeah,
well, no, Asura's fine. I think Asura's fine.
Yeah, I mean, part of that is because Asura is, like, so much more straightforward than Kratos. When Kratos does something big, it's like, he breaks a pillar or beats a guy, and then there's like 50 documents of text on why that's impressive. With Asura, it's just, he blew up a fucking planet. He destroyed a universe-sized statue, that kind of thing.
I do not think that Kratos is this fast. I think the Ragnarok speed is fine, probably. That seems pretty legit. But then, those scalings, I don't know about that, bro.
I think for me the problem mainly comes down to Helios, because, I've said it before, I think saying Kratos outsped Helios, when, into the context of the game, Kratos shot him down while he was distracted, and then just put his hand in front of his light while Helios was just sitting there at death's door. And even, like, the evidence they bring up of, like, other ways he could scale to Helios, like, oh, well, Atlas captured Helios. Cool. Have we seen Atlas dodge the light?
Also saying that he scales to Kronos because he defeated Kronos when Kronos was, like, weakened and chained up.
Yeah, and even then, it wasn't like he directly overpowered Kronos. He just climbed all over his body and carved him up like a fucking turkey.
Yeah, like, this is one of the the lore, God of Lore,
yeah.
whatever. Everyone knows about it. Like, I think the Ragnarok feat's fine.
Yeah, I will say, I wasn't really a fan of how, like, preachy they felt about the Kratos piece when they were saying, oh, well, it's easy to assume we don't see Kratos doing anything as impressive as Asura, but we do, and then all they say is just basically what I already mentioned. He defeated X, who does this in lore, he defeated Y, who does this in lore, and nothing on screen.
Yeah, like, I'll be completely transparent. I think Asura wins. I don't think Kratos wins this matchup. I'm not gonna dog points from the episode for having Kratos win, but I do think their arguments are pretty weird.
Yeah, I mean, I think Kratos winning is fine. It's just, the speed is a little... But I guess that's the consequence of, like, when 90% of your... Not even 90, just basically all of your high-end feats are just people saying shit.
This isn't like the Dovahkiin, who has so much backing material. Kratos' feats have, like, context.
Yeah.
It's not just blatantly, oh, this guy can destroy infinite universes and you directly overpower him. That's why I think they should have just focused on the Norse era stuff, because there's a lot of good feats there.
I just think there are some oddities in the black boxes as well. Like, one that stuck out to me when I rewatched it was them saying that Kratos would be fine if the planet was destroyed because he can breathe in space, and then Source a part in the Ares fight, which I was really confused what they meant by that, because I was like, when did he go into space during his fight with Ares? And then I went back and looked and was like, oh, it was a nightmare sequence where he was defending his family. And it's weird calling that space, because I haven't read, like, the novel, so I don't know if, like, what they mean when they say the novelization backs it up not being non-illusory, but when I looked at the scene, I was like, other than the general spacey look, what backs up this being actual space? Because, like, there's still clearly gravity here. He can still breathe just fine. How do we know this is just actual space like what Asura is flying around in?
Also saying stuff that, like, oh, Kratos has time manipulation, which Asura was affected by, ignoring that he overpowered that immediately afterwards.
I mean, I guess it's fair to say that, like, he was still vulnerable to it. It's just funny thinking, yeah, Chakra Byron did use it. That load of good. It did him.
Yeah, it went well for him.
Yeah. I'd still say, like, the general points are fair enough. It's just delivered very strangely for the most part.
Yeah.
Which I guess is kind of a consequence of when you're comparing mostly lore feats to just in-your-face straightforward stuff. I guess the only other thing to comment on then is just the alternate ending. Which, first of all, great that they saved the QTE for just that.
Good job, guys. Great. I
Yeah.
don't know how to feel about this. Fine concept to have just for one episode. I
Yeah.
think it's kind of stupid that Kratos just stands there and then gets killed by one punch.
Yeah. And I was fully expecting something like this to be in the episode because we know that they chopped up like a solid third of the animation, and I was very confident that they weren't just going to let that go to waste. I think it's just kind of a cute little addition more than anything.
It's fine. It's harmless.
Yeah. Just to give Kratos a happy ending at least.
Yeah, I do. It is pretty heartwarming to watch.
Yeah.
Even though it also means that Atreus is an orphan now. Whoops.
Whoopsies! God, we've been talking about this episode for a while.
I wasn't expecting us to talk for this long.
I thought this was going to be half an hour, I'm going to be honest.
Yeah, Kratos was also a very interesting episode.
There's definitely a lot to dissect here. Do I think it's bad? That is a very loaded question.
Do I think it's good? It's
I think the one thing
than a lot of episodes.
Yeah, I think the one thing we can agree on is that the hype for it absolutely worked against it.
Yep.
I'll just be blunt here. If this won either the ballot or especially the tournament, this community would have fucking exploded.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we already saw people were, like, very critical of Colex, which, at that, most people agreed was still a good episode after it won the poll. If this came out in this state, after winning the tournament, people have torn it to fucking shreds. More than they already do.
Yeah. Which I feel it's a little too harsh. Like, we've been kind of mean to this episode.
I think the one thing that you need to say is, people are way too unfair towards the crew, and especially Devil Artemis towards this, because...
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
At the end of the day, it's clear that the problems with this episode weren't out of laziness or anything, just mismanagement.
Yeah,
so,
I think that's pretty fair to say.
Yeah, so be sensible with your critiques, essentially.
But like, be realistic. They cannot put 100% of their time and effort or money into every episode, no matter how much you like the matchup.
Yeah.
It's not gonna happen.
Basically.
You are free to criticize the episode, but don't attack the crew for it.
Which I know, that sounds like common sense, but you know the old saying, common sense isn't common.
So, do we think this is a good episode?
I think it's an episode of very high highs and very low lows.
I think it's better than Joker vs. Giorno.
Yeah, I don't think it's the worst episode of the independent era so far. I still wouldn't say I like it, but it's probably because my expectations were so low. I didn't hate it so much as it just felt conflicted.
I feel like it says a lot that us, two people with very opposite opinions on the matchup, have basically the same thoughts on the episode.
Yeah. Most of the problems with the episode really are just how they handled Asura.
Yeah, just not a fan of that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'd be a fan of it as a whole if Asura was portrayed perfectly, but it would have made the entire thing a much easier pill to swallow.
Right.
I'd say if I were to give it a ranking, 5 or 6 is probably where I'd have it. Very middle of the road.
It's an episode that I probably won't rewatch very often, but
Same.
I wouldn't have anything against watching it with someone like, hey, you want to watch Kratos Asura again?
Basically, yeah.
Like, this isn't Bowser vs. Eggman.
Yeah,
Nothing will ever be.
It's not Bowser vs. Eggman, but it's also not like Sanji vs. Rock Lee or something.
Yeah, like it is an episode of Death Battle.
Yeah.
Perfectly serviceable. I'll probably forget about my opinions on it in 2 months.
Yeah. I think the one thing that is just kind of a shame is that, despite what they say at the end, we know for a fact that we're never getting another Asura episode.
Yeah, and if we do, I don't want it to be Kratos with Asura too.
Yeah, like, let's be real here,
It's
nobody
also
had the draw Kratos had.
Yeah. I get, you know what? Fair enough to you, Kratos. It's better than Kratos vs. Spawn.
Yeah. Well, that was fun at least.
Yeah. Speaking of Spawn, did you know that Spawn is coming to Death Battle again?
Yeah, I got spoiled on that
Ghost
before the
Rider?
episode was revealed.
Did you know that Ghost Rider vs. Spawn's happening?
Oh my god.
It was a secret, guys. It was supposed to be a secret.
Everyone on Discord was told, "Hey, don't spoil this," and they spoiled it many times. And this isn't directed towards any one person. A lot of y'all were just bad at hiding it. But yeah, thanks for coming on with me.
Thanks for having me.
I'd be happy
You know
to
what to
talk
say,
again about Ghost Rider vs. Spawn when that comes out, but until then, if you have anything to write us off with, be my guest.
Until next time, death to all gods.
Death to all gods. Except for Asura.
Except for Asura. He's pretty cool.
Yeah.